Lexsynergy is a global domain name management and online brand protection company with offices in the UK, Australia, South Africa, and San Diego, which is where I'm based. For today's webinar, Lexsynergy's founder and CEO, Daniel Greenberg, will be discussing the UK's recent referendum to leave the EU and its effect on domain name management and online brand protection strategies. We will leave some time at the end of the call for your questions, so if you have a question, please send that through using the Q&A function on the WebEx. I would now like to introduce the presenter for today's webinar, Daniel Greenberg. Daniel is an admitted attorney in the UK and South Africa with over 15 years' experience in trademarks, copyright, and domain names. With that, I'll turn it over to Daniel to begin the presentation.
Great. Thanks a lot, Marina. I'd like to welcome all the attendees to this webinar. I'm based out of London, sunny London today, actually a bit overcast. I'd like to thank Marina for that introduction, and also for all of you that are attending this webinar, which I think is one of the first in relation to domain names. I won't discuss the complete impact of the EU referendum and Brexit. I don't think the politicians know much what's going on, but I think from a domain name perspective, we thought that because there's still a lot of uncertainty, we need to set the scene to identify aspects that should be focused on at an early stage. And what we will do is, as the Brexit process evolves, we'll have subsequent webinars that are updated to give you updates on what's actually happening. This webinar will in particular highlight some risk areas, and we want to make sure that our clients are not caught out when the Brexit process starts, or if in fact, if it does start at all. So rather be proactive and address some issues now, and just be aware of them before the Brexit arises, as there could be some issues later on. I'd like to stress at this point, before I go through the agenda, that there's no need to panic or do anything crazy at the moment. We just need to put things into perspective, see where we are at now and where it could go, and kind of plan for that process. So with that, just go through the agenda. This WebEx presentation will be quite brief. It's, first of all, the Brexit considerations. We'll highlight those. We'll speak a bit about .eu and the Cyrillic version of the extension .eu that applies to the European Union. Some European country codes that may be affected by the UK leaving the European Union. And then within the UK, there are country code extensions that are applicable to the UK, and we'll discuss those in a little bit more detail. We will have some time for Q&A afterwards. If there are no questions, you can always drop us an email, and we'll have that contact information at the end. So moving on to the Brexit considerations. After the results were announced, people were scrambling, not knowing what to do. So while the politicians are in their hideaway at the moment discussing what needs to be done, we've highlighted certain points. This is not an absolute list, but it's just some that we thought are important at this current stage in the domain industry. So the first one is the UK extensions will become increasingly important for any company with a presence in both the UK and the EU. And that falls in line with the second point, where we say that core trademark should be secured in all major extensions in the United Kingdom. And there are a few relevant ones. One is .uk and co.uk. Co.uk has been the main TLD for the UK for some time. In 2014, .uk was launched, and that extension is, I think, quite important, because eventually it should replace or become more popular than co.uk, just because it's a shorter extension and people may want to go for that rather than the longer version. Then there's org.uk for not-for-profits, then me for personal use, me.uk, then .london, which is quite important if you think about it. That is the commercial center of the UK with such a large population. Then .scot, .wales, and .cameroon, which are three extensions which relate to two countries within the UK, Cameroon being Wales and Welsh. Then also companies that show a connection to Ireland should secure their trademarks within .ie. We'll deal with that in a subsequent slide. Ireland, I think, has a lot to gain from the UK leaving the European Union, so we'll discuss the impact of that as well. Then two very generalized points is your domain name portfolio from a general perspective should mirror your trademark portfolio. So what that means is if you have trademarks in European countries, you should have the corresponding domain registration. Many trademark owners tend to file a community trademark which covers the European Union or a UK mark, and what they forget to do is register the corresponding country code. So if you have a community trademark, you need to then register that mark as a domain name in all the extensions within the European Union, because one day you may want to trade in Spain, Portugal, and you would want to have that extension that matches your domain. And if the domain names aren't available, then you have to look at your trademark, and maybe it's a good point to reconsider how you file your mark or filing an alternative mark. So that is something that's quite larger. It's not specific to the Brexit, but it's worth mentioning now. Then also, what we discussed today is something that you should communicate internally. The reason being is that you may need to set aside a budget for additional registrations, potentially domain name disputes. One thing that we think might happen is squatters tend to be patient, knowing that if they secure the right domain name at the right time, they could potentially sell it back to the trademark owner at an inflated price. So they may be waiting for the UK government to invoke Article 50, which then triggers the whole exit from the European Union, in which they have 2 years to leave. So what happens is they may see this and start registering domain names, for instance, in Ireland, in other countries, or within the UK that match certain trademarks. And rather than going through this dispute resolution process, most of these squatters tend to offer the domain names at a price just lower than that of filing a complaint, and that's how they make a lot of money, as we've seen. So that's the main reason for that, is just to make sure that there are no gaps in your portfolio. So first we'll deal with the .eu and .eu in Cyrillic. Currently there's no impact on .eu registrations by British companies or individuals. EURID has not released any information yet that we can base any actions on. But what is noteworthy is that in order to register a .eu domain name, you need to be based in the European Union or Iceland, Norway, or Liechtenstein. And the implication there is that when the UK does leave the European Union, how will they treat UK companies and UK individuals? We believe that they will probably give a special allowance similar to Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein, where the UK will be added on to that. So if you come from that country, you could potentially keep your .eu domain name. So there would be a transition process. But what we would say now is if you think that there could be issues, there's the option of a proxy service providing a local presence, if you're worried about that, or if you want to enter the European Union and you currently just have a .uk domain name, it's good to get your .eu. If you have a Cyrillic domain, then you can register the Cyrillic version in .eu Cyrillic. So currently right now, if you don't have a .eu domain name, we think you should get one if you have a .uk, just so that they marry up, so that you at least have an all-encompassing domain name extension covering a large geographical areas, and I think 28 countries. And that's safe to say that you would need to obviously go into each country code and secure that as well if you need that. There are also some country code extensions that rely on the registrant or applicant being based within the European Union. Although Croatia is not part of the European Union, they do have a requirement that one of the options is you can register if you are located in any member states of the EU. France is the same with the exceptions there. I think it also includes Switzerland. Hungary is another one. Italy, Reunion, and Ireland, just off the African coast, just above Mauritius, as far as I understand. and also Ireland, which is one we'll deal with shortly. Bulgaria is another one that we've not included in the slide. So a lot of these country codes, rely on a company being within the EU. So if you have a UK company, you need to probably mark up and say that when the Brexit is invoked, that you look at those domain names, make sure the information is updated, that you do comply with the rules, because it could result in your domain name being deleted, suspended, or any other action taken by the registry if they think that there's non-compliance. We assume each registry will issue information about how they will address and how the transition process will work. Specifically within the UK, I briefly mentioned that .uk was launched in 2014, and that what nominated the governing body, the registry of .uk, is they said if you had a .uk domain name that was registered prior to the launch of .uk, you would be allowed to register your matching version for a period of 5 years. That particular matching domain will be reserved. So what that means is if I registered lexsynergy.co.uk before June 2014, that matching version, lexsynergy.uk, will be reserved for me to take up for the next 5 years. So there's quite a long window period. There's 3 years to go. So you can exercise your rights at any time. If after that period you haven't exercised your rights to secure the .uk domain, it will be released to the general public. And the issue there is 5 years is a long time. Lots of domain name owners haven't diarized June 2019 to register their domain name. So we would strongly advise that you secure your .uk domain name now. If you have the .uk or org.uk, and you do qualify to register the matching.uk, I would say do that now, because if you don't do it now, it could be released to the general public at a later stage, and you will have to incur costs in order to recover that through the dispute resolution process. Another aspect that we wanted to mention is with Ireland, which is .ie. When or if the UK leaves the European Union, Ireland will be the largest English-speaking country in the European Union. I think the only other country that has English as an official language is Malta. But so what the implication of that is, according to media reports that I've read, is that Ireland could replace the UK as the base for companies to enter the European Union, in that they speak English, they use the euro, unlike the UK using the pound. The time zone is favorable towards the US. So companies may shift over and move over to Ireland, and that might be the base from which they operate. Some examples already is Facebook, Apple, LinkedIn, Google. I'm sure you've all recently heard about the fine Apple has had to pay in Ireland, but nevertheless, these companies are there already, and a lot of companies I've heard are looking at moving over. So in this move, we would suggest looking at securing .ie domain names, in that your company may move over there, may need to be within the EU, and within .ie, it does have some sort of restriction in that you need to show a kind of connection to Ireland. So that could either be an Irish trademark, you could have an Irish company, or some sort of connection. And a connection could be, for example, taking out Facebook ads or LinkedIn ads. When you pay LinkedIn and Facebook, if you're outside the US, you pay those companies in Ireland. So in a way, you do have a connection to Ireland. So there's a way of registering your .ie domain names so that they are secured within Ireland for all the reasons that I have already mentioned. Then another aspect to consider, which may be a bit far-fetched but noteworthy, is that Scotland, there's a lot of talk that Scotland may leave the UK, they may want a referendum themselves. If they had to break away, I'm sure ICANN would, the governing body that regulates the release of extensions and IANA, which assigns CCTLDs, they would obviously get their own extension, but .scot would be relevant to .scotland. So it may be worthwhile securing that as we are unsure of what will happen there. Another aspect in Ireland which comes to mind now, just backtracking a bit, is what happens if Northern Ireland is absorbed into Ireland. Then all of a sudden you have a whole community that was used to using .uk, which will now have to use .ie, we would assume. So that's something that IE is kind of connected to .uk, so we would suggest that you marry those up. The same as Wales and Cameroon. If you do trade within the UK, it only makes sense, or in the European Union, that you register the matching ones in those countries as well. So that was a brief rundown of some of the points. I know I went through it quite quickly, but because things are quite, I would say, in their infancy at the moment in the development of the Brexit process, there is a lot of uncertainty in the domain industry, and some clients had been asking us about how does this affect their domain names. So these are some points that we thought were relevant. If you do have any questions, or you'd want us to look at your domain name portfolio and give you advice on which domain names you need to register, we don't suggest going crazy and registering thousands of domains, but just really for the core domains you use for your website as well as for your trademarks. We'll look at that, give you recommendations, and then guide you through the process. As soon as we have more information about the Brexit, we'll update this webinar and send out a notice once again to you. So, Marina, if there are no questions.
I don't see any at this time.
Okay, great. So at this moment, we'll conclude the webinar here. So feel free to reach out to myself or Marina at any time should you have any questions. And we thank you for attending this webinar. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.